Intimate Judaism deals with sensitive topics and uses explicit language. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Intimate Judaism. I'm Talli Rosenbaum.
And I'm Rabbi Scott Kahn. Talli, you and I have discussed many topics over the past 25 episodes. I can't believe it's 25 episodes of the podcast.
25, wow.
And often those topics, relate to problems and issues that people have in their intimate lives. And of course, that's very important. But today, you and I wanted to go in a slightly different direction. We wanted to speak about ways that couples can enhance their intimacy and sex lives, even when there isn't a problem.
Absolutely. That's what people want to hear. They want to hear about how to make their lives better, and particularly their intimate lives. Today, we are very excited to introduce our guests, Yiscah and Yehonatan Schumer from Kelim Shluvim, which actually means interacting vessels. Yiscah and Yehonatan are instructors, advisors for couples on intimacy and sexuality. They specialize in sexual enhancement through Tantra and Tao and similar philosophies, which we're going to find out more about.
So, Talli, I'm going to ask the same question to Yiscah and Yehonatan, but I'd like to first hear it from you. What exactly are Tantra and Tao?
So, Scott, what I understand from my interactions with Tantra and Tao practitioners is that Tantric sex originates from Hinduism and Hindu practices, which are based on all sorts of pagan beliefs. And it's a practice that focuses on creating a deep and intimate connection with meditative practices. It encourages people to focus on their connections between their mind, their body, and their soul. And it is intended to enhance the experience of sexual intimacy. What I understand about Tao is that it is a system of traditional beliefs from China. Taoists believe in the life forces, the qi and other forces in the body. And they also believe that when a man ejaculates, the semen has life force in it. So when a man ejaculates, he depletes himself of his vitality or of his life force. So they use techniques to allow men to either prevent ejaculation or to be able to increase and enhance their arousal and achieve climax without necessarily ejaculating. So these are techniques that are exercises that they use, and they are meant as well to enhance the couple's sexual experience. I do have to say that really all of the Tantra practitioners who I have met have been either secular Israelis or non-Jews in other countries. And I was quite interested to hear that there is an Orthodox couple from Zfat who deal with these practices, and I'm waiting to hear how they manage to integrate these practices along with Jewish philosophy and Jewish practice and Jewish law.
At the beginning of the interview, we'll be dealing more with some of the theoretical ideas that underlie Tantra and Tao, as well as the important question of how kosher these practices are for Orthodox Jews. Later on in the interview, Yiscah and Yehonatan will deal with some of the practical implications and how a couple can use these practices to enhance their own sexual lives. But first, remember to visit our website, intimatejudaism.com, for the full podcast archive, show notes, a free men's mikvah list, and more. We're honored and gratified that Intimate Judaism has been the starting point for many important discussions about sex and intimacy and how they relate to Judaism. Please help us continue to help people by sharing this podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or any other way you can get the word out. We also have an Intimate Judaism Patreon site. Patreon supporters get bonus material, episodes, merch, and more. And it's also an opportunity for people who benefit from Intimate Judaism to support the work that Talli and I do with a small monthly payment, and you decide how much or how little. If you enjoy Intimate Judaism, you should definitely check out our Patreon page and consider becoming an Intimate Judaism patron. The link is in the description of this podcast, as well as in the show notes. We thank you in advance, and we really hope you enjoy the bonus material and merch that's there. And please continue to send us your questions and comments to intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com and visit jewishcoffeehouse.com as well as tallirosenbaum.com.
I just want to make a couple of quick announcements to our listeners. We recognize that we have listeners from all over. We have listeners from here in Israel, and we have a lot of listeners from Brooklyn and Williamsburg. We have a pretty big Hasidic demographic, apparently. We
Somewhat
get a lot of
surprisingly
letters.
large, I can say.
Yeah, so to all our Hasidic listeners out there, we love you, and we're so happy to hear from you. There's kind of a buzz, at least on my Facebook feed, about a topic that we have actually addressed, and that is the different kinds of touch between couples. Rabbanit Malka Petrikovsky was recently interviewed by my colleague, Dr. Michal Prince, on her podcast, which is in Hebrew. Rabbanit Malka talked about the need to maybe re-examine some of the harchakot due to the fact that today couples are able to appreciate different types of touch. That some touch is touch which is caretaking, and some touch is touch which is comforting. Not all touch necessarily leads to sexual activity.
Talli, let me just translate that term you used, harchakot. That refers to certain prohibitions that the rabbis instituted when a couple is in nidah. That means after a woman gets her period and they're not permitted to be sexually intimate, in order to prevent sexual intimacy and situations which can lead to sexual intimacy, these harchakot are put into place.
For sure. And there's been quite a buzz on different groups, even the English groups. I just wanted to remind our listeners that if you are interested in that kind of discussion, please go to episode 10, because we spoke about this with Rabbanit Nechama Goldman-Barish and the Yoetzet Atara Ice. I also am really excited to talk about our upcoming episodes. Recently, Harav Benny Lau came out with a stand on inclusion of LGBT couples in Orthodox society. How do we do that? And he has agreed to come on our podcast and talk about...
It'll be the very next episode, I believe.
That will be the next episode. We also have Rabbanit Oriya Mevorach, who will be hosted on our podcast. She is also here. We're bringing some of what's happening in Israel to our listeners in the diaspora. Rabbanit Oriya Mevorach has recently come out with a book called Ma'at Mevakeshet, which means what are you asking? And her specialty is in sexual education for young women. And we're going to be talking about body image, culture, messages, sexuality, and female masturbation. Finally, we're going to also have an episode on sexual pain. And I'm not going to say too much more about that. I will keep you waiting. Those of you who are interested in hearing more about approaches and treatments, or even being able to talk about the fact that there are couples who are very much affected by female sexual pain disorders. And so we will be devoting an entire episode to that as well.
It's pretty cool that even though we've been doing this now for 25 episodes, the topics just keep coming up. There's more and more to talk about. And Talli and I basically already set up an entire year's worth of topics that we have planned. We're looking forward to those upcoming episodes, and we're certainly looking forward to our talk today with Yiscah and Yehonatan, who live in Zfat. These are two Orthodox religious Jews who also are teachers of Tantra and Tao.
We're really excited to ask you questions and understand more about what you do.
Thank you for joining us today.
Our pleasure. Truly our pleasure.
I'm going to open up the interview by asking what I assume is a pretty basic question, but I'm assuming many of our listeners are like me in that I don't know anything about Tantra. I don't know anything about Tao. I do know that this is something which you teach. Before we're getting into some of the specifics, can you please define what is Tantra and Tao and how does it relate to intimacy?
So I'll start just with talking about our connection we found in the Tantra and the Tao, and then maybe Yonatan will define the difference between the Tao and the Tantra. But for us, when we learned the Tantra and the Tao, we saw a larger approach to the body in general and to intimacy and sexuality specifically. We keep learning the connection between our physical body and our mental being, and it has so much to do with what happens between a couple in their relationship and in their sexual relationship. So there's a lot of connection between mental intimacy and physical intimacy within the Tao and the Tantra. And the Tao and the Tantra deal a lot with the energy of the sexuality. And that's something I think we're gonna try together to figure out and see how it can actually really change the whole interaction when a couple knows how to work with their energy, discover their energy, to allow energy to be there. Energy, mamash, like their mental energy and physical energy that allows the story of their sexuality to sometimes be completely different from what they knew till now.
Maybe we'll start also with a little bit of background. So the Tantra Tantra and Tao both come from the Far East, where the Tantra is a stream in Hinduism in India, and Tao is the ancient Chinese culture and also belief and way of living. And so the Tantra is basically a way of life. It's not only about sexuality, it's a belief, it's a polytheistic religion. That's why we're gonna say a few words what do we take and what we don't take from Tantra. One of the things that they teach as part of their spiritual practice is how to work with the body and with, as Iskas mentioned, the energy, the spiritual energy of the body, and with the masculine energy and the feminine energy, also as something that is universal, not only personal and physical, but also as part of the world, and just looking at the world with those different energy in it. And in a similar but different way, also the Tao basically is touching with less of religion and polytheistic metaphors, is really just talking about, we also know the yin and yang, which comes from the Tao, which really sees the femininity and the masculinity in the world as energies, which we found very similar to the way that our tradition, the more inner side of Judaism, like the Zohar and the Kabbalah, are talking about that the world is all created by Hashem, that is one, but is also built from different kind of energies. One of them is the masculine, the zikri, and the nukba, the feminine side of reality, that is mentioned also in the Zohar, like the Shekhinah or the Malchut or the nukba, the feminine of the world. And what the beautiful things we saw is that there is a lot of parallelities. Of course, the basis is different and belief is different, but the practice is there. And also, after learning all of that from like those religions and faiths and ways of life in Far East, we found that also our chachamim, our sages, really knew all this knowledge, and it's mentioned in Talmud, and it's mentioned in a lot of ancient Jewish texts, and we just lost it. When we went out to the Galut, be among nations who hate the physical and hate the body, and really see everything in a very dark way, that we just neglected the whole physical side of our life, and we just forgot all this knowledge. There's like a story, there's like an understanding that people sometimes in Zfat say that Abraham is going to send his descendants, the other children that are not Yitzhak, is going to send them Kedma el Eretz Kedem. And Rashi said that he gives them Shemot Shel Tumah. He teaches them a spiritual way that is not for us, and he sends them away. And many years after, the Jews are looking, to go back to this knowledge that we lost, going to exile in the West, and we go there and we've learned it back. We regain this knowledge from in India or in China.
Yehonatan, that leads to another question, though, because you just cited a Rashi which has a tradition that Abraham gave the children of his concubines an impure name, and that impure name represents a spiritual path which is not for us. That's how you just put it. So now you're saying that these are ideas that are originally Jewish, that were lost. However, they were maintained in some of the religions of the East, like Hinduism, and now we're just getting it back, taking back that which was originally ours. At the same time, I have to say that I have a bit of maybe halachic skepticism, because even though I freely admit that I know nothing about Tantra per se, but given that we know that it's a Hindu concept, how can you justify taking something that has idolatrous overtones, or maybe that's even an understatement? It actually comes from an idolatrous practice, and bring it into Judaism. Now, I will say, I do know you also teach at Machon Puah, which is a very religious and serious organization. Full disclosure, my wife used to take classes there to become a college teacher, so I know that it's a very serious organization, and their haskama, their approval, means a lot, and you both are obviously Orthodox Jews. So I'm wondering how you balance this and how you can justify it, so to speak.
first I want to say we're not here giving kashrut to learn to anything. We're not rabbanim. We're not giving kashrut to anything, and especially not to tantra, because we too are more connected to the Tao than to the tantra, because, as you said, the tantra is a polytheistic religion, which really takes it to very far places that we don't want to go there. And also, one of the most amazing people we met, like Tantra teachers here in Israel, he said that it's today very difficult to find really a real Tantra teacher. Most of the people really just take it to the very sexual and very, as you said, idolatry, worshiping thing, and it's not really touching the essence of it. But I also want to say that the word in Hebrew for impure is tameh, and the word tameh means atum. It's also, if you like change the order of the letters, atum means sealed. So sometimes things that we see that are wrapped in something that is not something we can really identify with, sometimes it has in it knowledge that we do want to learn from it. And that's what Chachamim say, Chochma b'goyim tamin.
You're referring to the ancient rabbinic statement that if a person hears that there is wisdom among the non-Jews, you should believe that it's true. They really do possess wisdom.
Also from Tantra, but mostly from Tao, because the Chinese, they bring it like in Chinese medicine, and we go and we do acupuncture and all those physical and energetic knowledge that we have. We take it today without taking the philosophy and the religion behind it. So basically, this is knowledge about the body. This is knowledge about the physical and energy that in Jewish tradition is called nefesh, or Kabbalistic. They talk about the 5 levels of the neshama, nefesh, ruach, neshama. So the nefesh is the physical spirit, or as Rambam calls it the nefesh chiyunit. And we're not doing something. It's not something that is fundamentally spiritual, but it's more something that it has to do with the knowledge of how the body and the mind work.
Just as a follow-up, would you say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that it's somewhat akin to yoga, which also is a spiritual practice from Hinduism. It's a school of thought in Hinduism. But many people, even in religious circles, have no problem doing yoga because it's been removed from the religious context and is understood as a science of the body. The idolatrous elements of it are no longer relevant to those who do it in the Orthodox world. Is this something similar?
I want to say, the truth is, I'd like to bring our conversation back to relationships, because we come to meet couples from the belief and the strong connection and the strong energy that a couple has between them when they connect with their mental and with their mind and with their nefesh, with their mental connection and with their body connection. And that's what we're trying to enrich. The truth is, I don't want to go into that, even though I have what to say about working with the yoga and working with like different things. And I think we don't want, I'll say maybe one thing, we don't want to say, we're not puskei halacha, and that's not what we're looking to do in life. But our Rav, we've been walking our path with him for like 20 years. And he keeps saying about everything we meet, or every like things we've been asking him about, that we really have to make sure we're pure and we're doing things from our connection with Hashem and not taking spiritual path that has to do with tumah. And I think also with yoga we have to be careful. But I don't think it's not our subject that we deal with.
He's, if we want to quote him, he says, Torah, there's only one. There's only one Torah. The Torah that Hashem gave us in Har Sinai.
But there are
everything else,
yeah.
There are different methods and practices and techniques that we can learn. Chochma b'goyim tamin, we can learn how to enrich our life, how to better our way of living and connecting.
Okay, so I think that we are acknowledging that there is a very interesting discussion that can be had about whether or not the principles upon which these techniques or this way of life are based are relevant to us, or certainly how we separate the pagan or idolatrous aspect from the aspects that are actually more inherent to Kabbalistic sources in Judaism. But I think that what our listeners probably want to hear more about is how you use these practices to enhance their marital connection. So could you tell us more and give us more practical information about how you can help couples get more? I think you were talking about awareness of their bodies and awareness of each other. Tell us more about it. It sounds really fascinating.
I think there are like three different, I don't know if to say fields or like paths that we like walk with couples. One of them is understanding, like if we're looking specific on our intimacy and like mamash, our sexuality, we can see that most of the people heard about reflexology. One of the things that the Tao talks about, that mamash, there's like the whole body reflects in our mamash, in our intimacy and our sexual organs. And the understanding of that means so much to the connection of a couple, to understand that it's not only like an action that happens in their intimate organs, but like through their sexual connection, there's like their whole body and their whole mental part of their being is connecting. It also helps us as therapists to see when something is stuck or something doesn't work, or if there's pain, or if there's like things that are standing between a couple, to understand that their sexual connection is like a connection of their whole being. And that's something we really work with, and we give couples exercises of like connecting their mental beliefs of sexuality, and connect it to the way they touch each other and the way they come close to each other. And that's like one of the paths that we really go through with couples. Another one is the connection between their feelings and the connection of their emotions, and the connection of the heart and the sexuality. It's like for us, it's so obvious that when you open up your heart, you can open up your body. But I guess it's not so obvious for people. And it's something that we practice, and different ways of practicing, of really practicing coming into each other's heart and world and emotions as a way to come in each other's body and make the path to each other's body be a natural path, because that's what happens when we feel so close to each other. And that's like a whole thing that we practice, and we have a lot of exercise and a lot of workshops that have to do with the mental connection. And the main connection that really has to do specific with the Tao is working with the energy, the sexual energy. And maybe that's something that Yehonatan should talk about more.
Okay, so before you do that sounds really interesting. What came up for me is that there's something very holistic in your methods that parallels the split between Western approaches to any type of quote unquote dysfunction. In Western sexual medicine, we look at particular dysfunctions as having some kind of isolated problem with blood flow or hormones, and we look to fix it. You know, there's a genital problem, let's treat the genital problem, whereas alternative or holistic approaches will exactly do what you're talking about. Merge between the feelings, the emotional, the mental, the entire body experience, and working with the body's energy. So if you're going to go to a reflexologist, for example, or some other type of holistic healer, or some sort of approach that integrates the body, mind, spirit, heart, all of that, that often will have a much deeper outcome.
And actually quicker, many times quicker, because when we, as you said, when we isolate what we see as a problem, and it's basically like when you drive in your car and there's light on your dashboard, and instead of really fixing what's the problem, you just smash the bulb, and not really touching the source of the problem. So if something is, let's say, stuck in your sexuality, it's usually not where the problem is. It's usually just an indicator to something that is really happening deeper. And by just fixing the external side of the situation, you miss the opportunity sometimes to go deeper and really fix what's needed to be fixed under.
I want you to talk about the spiritual, which is the main thing that you want to talk about, the energy. Do you only give exercises, or do you actually do tantric massage or body work? Do you touch your couples? I imagine that there would be gender same touching since you're an Orthodox couple. I know that in Tantra it's not always like that. But can you talk about the techniques that you use?
I'll say that we don't touch people that come to us, but what we do is we teach couple to touch each other. And we feel that that's not only because we're religious, that's our belief. We want to give them the tools to be there for each other, to really bring healing and bring and develop and learn each other's body language and heart language. And we actually, when we went to learn different things that the Taoist or the Tantra teach about, like intimate massage and all those and like different things, we learned it in order to give couples tools or knowledge to meet each other in deeper levels.
I'm curious about how that was for you to learn like these yoni massages, or yoni referring to the female genitalia. I'm wondering how you felt in these workshops that you studied this in.
So it's important for me to say that we looked for teachers for a long time. Every time we went to a teacher, we really picked them out, and we had them teach us in our language. That means that no one touched us, because our intimacy is holy for ourselves too. So we learned in different ways. We learned the idea, we learned the practice, we learned like from really amazing teachers that respect our place and taught us in order so we can know this knowledge and also teach the knowledge. But we didn't go to like different like yoni massages and workshops that everyone experienced with everyone else, and we didn't go there.
Also, Talli, what your questions are great, but those questions are really regarding not the traditional, neither Tantra nor Tao, because these are very, very religious, traditional, ancient cultures. And what you're referring is to what's today known as Tantra in the Western world, in the New Agic Western world, where people are basically not really following the rules of the Tantra, but they're just picking what they would like to enjoy from the Tantra and doing it their own way.
That's a really interesting point. I will say that before this interview, Talli and I had looked at having other people also discuss some of these issues, and there was somebody that we decided we didn't want to have on simply because we were concerned about this issue of the practitioner touching his students. There's also not only religious issues, but there can be a fear of abuse issues. So we're very happy that we're speaking with you and that that's your attitude towards this.
I mean, that was really another one of my questions, which I would like you to address, but I know you're in the middle of talking about the concept of energy, but this is also really interesting for our listeners, I think, and especially since a lot of our listeners, like I said in the beginning, come from Hasidic backgrounds, and I have had situations with Hasidic couples who have somehow fallen into treatments with Tantra practitioners, I think possibly because the language of the Kabbalistic language speaks to them on some level.
And you're speaking about non-Jewish Tantra practitioners, right, Talli?
I'm speaking about secular ones. I'm not speaking about non-Jewish ones, because this is Israel. Okay. But still, there's definitely some vulnerability there because there's a lot of naivete, and I'm not sure also about the ability to consent, especially when it's one partner, usually the male, who's pushing the female to a Tantra practitioner in order to, quote unquote, fix her problem or make her more sexual. That male partner may be leading a double life, which is not unusual for Hasidic people who can't always just change their lives so easily.
So maybe we would don't miss the opportunity to talk about the energy, because this is a very, very important concept that stands behind this whole story of the Tantra and the Tao and the Chule. This whole idea of, and you referred to it as spiritual. Basically, it's as I said earlier, it has more to do with what we call in the Jewish tradition nefesh, or the Baal Tanya even calls it nefesh behemit.
Let me translate that term for our listeners. The nefesh behemit means the animal soul. It's a term that's used often by the Baal Tanya, Rav Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Hasidut of Chabad. It's the animal soul, the most basic life force of a human being.
which is not which is not saying anything negative about it. Just saying it's a very basic physical spirit that is
It means
part of.
fundamentally the life force of a person. We're not talking about soul or spirituality so much as just in the sense of the Torah saying that the life is in the blood. And it's almost like the fact that the person is alive. That's how I understand that concept.
But really we also have to go to where the Maimonides, he says בשמונה פרקים לרמב"ם, at the beginning of the שמונה פרקים, he says Nefesh Adam Achati. Really, our soul is one. And when the soul is reflected in our mind, we have thoughts. And when the soul is really dwells in our heart, we have emotions. And when the soul goes and touches our body, we are alive, physically alive. So the Nefesh Behemit is basically part of the Neshama, is part of this infinite thing that makes us who we are. And one of the things that really beautiful things about when the Tao talks about this energy, calls it Chi. Chi is the energy of life. And one of the wonderful things about the Chi that it really follows our mind, follows our what we concentrate on. So if we really concentrate on something, the Chi is gonna flow there, it's gonna go there. And one of the best examples for it is really when we think thoughts or imagine images that really arouse us. What happens is that all this energy, all this life force flows into our sexuality. And one of the things is for a lot of, I'll say from the masculine side, for the men's side, that many times what we feel when this happens, when we feel aroused, is basically all the blood on our body really goes there, and part of all the physical functions that happen there are because the blood goes there, and the energy feels like, for a lot of people, feel like something that want to burst out. But really, what happens is that this concentration of energy is just a lot of energy. And one of the things we want to learn is not immediately to let go of all the energy. You can imagine if you charge up your phone and it's full of energy in the morning, and you press a button and it empties out and you have no battery. It's really, it's really silly. Why would you do that? I mean, why would you charge your phone and then empty it immediately? This is basically what happens when a man is aroused and it has a very strong energy in his waist and in his lower belly, and he wants to really ejaculate immediately. But wait a second, you have a very strong force of life in you. And there's a beautiful midrash about Yosef Tzaddik that when he, the story there, when he was going somewhere with his sexuality and he wanted to stop it, he really pulled all the energy. There's a pasuk that talks about the keshet shelo, how he pulled it back, and energy goes back into his body and really goes through his hand. And this is a metaphor, what really, or actually a good description of what happens to a man who learns how to elevate his energy and bring it to the heart, bring it to his mind, or really let the energy flow instead of burst out through that ejaculation. Really flow in his body and really wakens up. A man I sat with a few weeks ago, we practiced it, what's called in Hebrew, al yavesh.
Al yavesh, okay.
Like, as we say, dry. Like with no partner, just learning how his body works and teach him how to work with his energy. After doing this exercise a few minutes, he said, wow, I feel like I had 10 cups of coffee without having even one. I feel so awake. I feel so energized. I mean, I can hear my thoughts. Something really beautiful happens to our body and mind when we learn how to work with this energy.
When you talk about holding the energy rather than releasing it all at once, just so I understand better, you're alluding to it now, but is that in order to enhance your pleasure? Is it in order to enhance your partner's pleasure? Or is it nothing to do with pleasure? It's something else altogether. What's the purpose that you're trying to achieve?
I want to say something. I want to say, like, before Yehonatan answers, but I want to approach your question and say that the first thing that happens is actually creating space for process. And that's something that the dynamic of the sexual meeting between a man and woman is lacking a lot of times because they're hurrying somewhere. Like their ejaculation makes them hurry somewhere. And then she doesn't feel like going into this thing at all because there's no space for her. And she doesn't have an opportunity to to explore and to learn her body and how does it work, because they're chasing someone. And the first thing that happens is first of all creating space
for both of
them. And that space allows them to realize that there's more things that can happen, and they can connect in different ways when they're actually being sexual. It's not like, okay, let's talk about they're being sexual and they're touching each other and they're really connecting, but there's like more things that are happening there. That's the first thing that happens. That's so important. It's like basic. Besides that basic thing, there's much more.
So really, it's interesting what you're asking, because it's a good question, because I would say yes to everything. It enhances the physical pleasure because it really lets the man enjoy his sexuality and learn how many orgasms he can have without ejaculating, and how different kinds of orgasms he can have. Most men, and I'm talking about, I don't know, I never checked the number, but I would guess that this is 99.9% of the people in the world, men in the world, they don't really know that they can have something else. They just have the same bread and you say hummus, pita and hummus every morning, because that's the only thing they know. But also a man can have many orgasms, different kind of orgasms, and really enjoy sexuality in a much longer and more relaxed and can say colorful way. And of course, it lets also his partner to learn her sexuality and to explore it, and to, as Yiscah mentioned, and to find out what can happen there too. Another thing is really the feeling that I have my sexuality, I can control it. It's mine to enjoy it, and it's mine to choose in it. I don't like the word control, but more choice. I can choose when and where and how long and all the things I have was like what's called malchut. I can rule my body. I know what happens with it. I can really enjoy it and not really be afraid where it's going to lead me and how fast it's going to lead me there.
I can also say that there's a lot of when a man learns to have the malchut in his sexuality, it influences him, his connection to his body. Also, not when they're like having a sexual meeting, but also when they're in the times of nida, that he's less afraid of his sexuality. He can be intimate.
Can be emotionally
intimate without being sexually intimate, because he has malchut. He knows how to
play
around with it. He's like not afraid of his amazing energy.
So we were taught. I was taught. I grew up religious, and I was taught to be afraid of my manlyhood. I was taught to be afraid of my sexuality and afraid of zera levatala, keri, all those words.
So you're saying that growing up religious, you were taught to be afraid of spilling seed in vain, that semen was a dangerous and scary thing.
Yeah, all those words that a lot of people growing up religious are afraid of, sometimes are confused from, being sexual, and sometimes, it goes out, the ejaculation happens too early, and they think that it's considered like masturbation, and there's a lot of confusion. And basically, just learning how my body works and enjoy this energy enriches not only the sexual intercourse, as we said, and not only his experience of his own body and enjoying and learning how to work with his body, but also, I have to say, also spiritually, also like the feeling of being energized and being, really being in malchut with choice, my forces, my masculine force is really, really powerful. And I just want to mention one last thing, which is physical. Is the beautiful thing about it. If someone ejaculates immediately, one of the things that happens that he feels tired and not energized and wants to go to sleep, and it's hard to wake up in the morning, and the mood is down. But if you, before you really, share your abundance, we like to say, share your masculine abundance with your partner, which eventually you can. Before that, you really go and enjoy the flow of the energy in the body. You elevate it, you bring it to the heart, to the mind, and you let your body be soaked with this energy. And then you share the abundance with your partner. You are left with a lot of energy, not tired, and also the erection stays there after the ejaculation. Most men really, after they ejaculated, their body goes to sleep, their erection falls down. But one of the beautiful things is, because your body is energized, even after the man ejaculated, his body stays energized, and he can stay there physically, standing there, being there for his partner and also for himself, enjoying the rest of the evening together, even after he shared his abundance with his partner.
I was just going to summarize for our listeners. We've spoken a lot on our podcast about these subjects, particularly what you had said about fear. You had brought up the idea of being afraid. And when you have malchut, and what you meant by that was when you have majesty, when you are the king, you are the master of your domain, so to speak. When you have that ability to know that you can regulate your own sexuality, you become far less anxious about it. And what you're saying, in essence, is that you're using techniques that are based on the understanding from the mystical sources that ejaculation, that semen has a life force to it. And rather than quickly kind of erupt or burst that life force, a man can actually learn how to hold on to it, how to be in his arousal. And that's not an easy thing when you are brought up the way you mentioned you were brought up, with a lot of fear of arousal. The idea of even being aroused is often wired in with guilt and conflict because of the fear that the arousal will come. And here you're taking it into a completely different domain. You can take this power and energy and you can learn to store it up, and you can learn to hold it and enhance it and regulate it. And even if you do have an orgasm or several orgasms, you can still continue to make love with your wife and mutually feel pleasure.
So then I want to follow up on that with asking about the female side, because until now you've spoken primarily about the male encompassing this idea of malchut and controlling his own sexuality and enhancing it. What happens on the female side?
A good question, but I want to answer that question. But I also want to say we started with the man's side because we're used to approaching the woman's problem with her sexuality because he has no problem. And that's why a lot of times our processes with couples start with this basic knowledge that creates space. One of the beautiful words for the feminine intimate in Mekorot from Chazal is oto makom. Makom, like hamakom asher yivchar Hashem.
Yiscah, let me just translate for our listeners. You're saying something very, very interesting. You're using the phrase oto hamakom, which is a rabbinic euphemism for the women's genitalia, but it means literally that place. You're saying that the phrase itself is more than just a euphemism, but actually refers to something very positive because, for example, Jerusalem or the Temple Mount is called the place that God will choose, the same word, makom.
Yes, but I also want to approach the word makom. In Hebrew, it's the word space. And I think that's like a basic thing that feminine intimacy and also mental and sexual intimacy needs. Also because a woman is the space that a baby grows in, and the feminine body is the space that the sexual meeting happens. The basic thing a woman needs is space, the space for herself, space within their sexual meeting. And that's like what Yehonatan talked about, is like when the man practices and allows space, time to be there, in space of like seeing each other to be there. That's like allowing her intimacy and her orgasm to get space within their relationship. And I think that's like the basic thing, and that's like one of the basic things we work on with couples, is creating that basic space. But besides that, there's also exercises that we do with women, the same exercises to learn how to move that energy within her body and discover more types of orgasm that she has, like in different places of her body. Mamash, like one of the amazing things of the woman's body, that there's like different types of orgasms that can happen in different parts of her body. And the same word of malchut, when a woman knows how to to move the energy in her body, she can be in charge of her pleasure. A lot of women don't know that they can be in charge of their own pleasure. They're expecting their husband to know and to lead and to do things for them because it's all up to him. And we want to give him the malchut, but at the same time, we want to give her the malchut to be the malka of her own body, of her own
Queen.
the queen of her own body, of her own sexual energy, and play around with it. Be playful with it.
Also, there's one of the beautiful things about women, that they really bring everything in. That's the word in Hebrew for the womb is rechem, which is from the word rachamim. And rachamim is really to be able to be compassionate towards things that are happening around us. And she's very compassionate towards her partner and towards her children, and she contains and she brings everything in, and she really loses her place. That's why one of the reasons why the beautiful term hamakom, the place, is really for it, because how can she have a place for something, for sexuality, if she doesn't have a place for herself?
Hamakom also refers to God.
Right. So one of the names of Hashem are hamakom. Hu mikomo shel olam. He is the place of the world. And so the hamakom is really something purely divine. And you actually mentioned the word yoni, which comes from Hinduism, from Tantra. And yoni is translated from Sanskrit, from the ancient Hindu, into holy cave, like a holy, like sanctified cave. And the man, the lingam, the masculine organ, is translated into beam of light, or as a scepter of light. Like the metaphors are very, very similar. But I want to say, but after you really are, scattered all over your life, and part of you is with the children, and part of you is with your partner, and part of you is left at work, and part of you is still standing in traffic, and you're all over the place. One of the things, before you want to be sexual or intimate with someone, you want to recollect and reclaim all your parts. And what we do is like a meditation that really pulls in all the energy that the woman lost during the day, and it's like reconcentrating. It's actually very different. It's also almost the opposite from what the man is doing. The man is really sharing his periphery with all the energy that is concentrated, but the woman is doing exactly the opposite. She brings she's recollecting all the energy that was scattered all over the day, and she's recollecting and reconcentrating it back into her center. And coming back to her center is really allowing her to be present with her partner. Sometimes, people complain that they don't understand why she can't have sex with me when there's still dishes in the sink. And you say, well, what? So for men, it's like you can't really wrap your mind around it, because what's the connection between the the dishes in the sink and sexuality? But this is really this is it. When her mind is partially in the living room, and some of it is in the kitchen, and some of it is with the kids. Are they awake? Are they asleep? And some of it is not even at home. Like, how can she be intimate with someone when she's not here? When she really when she does this meditation of recollecting her energy back, bringing it back into herself, she'll be able to be more present with him in their connection, in the sexual or just intimate moment that they want to have and share in the end of the day.
When I practice this with women, the first thing they say, they're like amazed. Wow, I have a choice. I can make it happen, because they have they're like, they don't know what to do. It's just not here. It's just, they don't know what to do. It's just not here. It's just missing. This sexual energy is missing out of their life. And when they start practicing, they're like, wow, I can make it happen. I can choose to bring it into my life. I can choose to move it in my body. I can choose to feel it.
It's very important, because you're talking about increasing your sense of sexuality through your sense of self, through being able to be mindful and grounded and collected and self-regulatory. I imagine you probably use some breathing and meditation to do that, but it's really the embodiment of your own sexuality that allows you to be present for your partner, is what you're saying.
Yeah, present for the, and I think
For yourself first.
yeah, first of all for yourself, and then to communicate this amazing energy, and not only energy, our love, our emotions, our commitment to each other and to our life together. So it's like באמת, ודבק באשתו והיו לבשר אחד. But
And that pasuk you just quoted is from the second chapter of Bereshit, speaking of Adam and Chava, the first two human beings, and he will cling to his wife and they will become a single flesh. That was what you were referring to.
yeah, but I want to say that a lot of the things we practice after people learn how to work with their own body is how to communicate the language of their body. And that's also something that people are lacking, of how to communicate, like how to touch each other in a way, how to approach each other, and like all these little exercises that allow them to actually communicate and learn from each other how to enrich and how to have a deeper sexual and mental relationship.
So it sounds a lot like what you're describing now is a combination of meditation along with specific physical exercises. Is that right?
Yeah.
100%.
If our listeners would like to hear and know more about your methods and about you, how can they learn more? Do you have a website or do you have workshops that you give here in Israel?
So we do have a website, and we're also available online. Our website mostly right now is Hebrew, but we do have one course that is available in English. It's about the manly sexuality, but it's very relationship oriented, and it's good for both of them to watch and learn. It's called You're the Man, reclaiming our manlyhood, reclaiming our knowledge that we didn't get when we were growing up, and both with also the physical knowledge and the mental, spiritual, emotional levels of the sexuality.
So I'll also say for Hebrew speakers, we also have a book on dates for married couples to date each other, to go out on dates and have experience their love life. And it's not a sexual book at all. It has to do with their NSI, non-sexual intimacy. And it's a book that has to do very much of experiencing the relationship. It's called Le'orer Ahava. You can also buy it on our website. We can also buy it online. And there's also in Hebrew, there are a lot of courses that have to do with communication and intimacy and sexuality. And there's a lot of things, a lot of games we created. There's a lot of things in Hebrew. And we hope to have more and more things in English too. For now, it's only that mostly the course of You're the Man.
And we will provide a link to your website in both the show notes as well as in the description of the podcast.
For sure. I have a question for our listeners who would like to be able to learn more about Tantra in the United States or other places where they might live. Do you have some kind of a network of other practitioners who are also religious and practice in accordance with Jewish philosophy and Jewish law around the world? Or are you pretty unique?
I don't know what to say about other people around the world, but what we can say that we meet online a lot of couples from all over the world. Like yesterday, we sat with a couple from Atlanta, and the week before from New York. There's like couples we meet online, and beautiful, amazing processes we do with couples online. So that's also an amazing option. Be in touch with us instead of meeting online.
Well, that's great. Everybody is working on Zoom these days, so it really
It doesn't matter where you are.
You don't
anymore.
have to go to Zfat, although it's always nice to go to Zfat.
Yeah, you're always invited to Zfat.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Yiscah and Yehonatan Schumer, thank you very, very much for joining us today on Intimate Judaism.
Thank you so much. This was really fascinating.
Our pleasure.
And Yehonatan recently filmed a lecture, an opening lecture, which he's offering free. And if you're interested in getting a free link to this class, just write to him at orpnimi1@gmail.com. That's orpnimi1@gmail.com. Thank you all for joining us for another episode of Intimate Judaism. As Talli said at the beginning of this episode, we have lots of great topics coming up. Especially, I'll mention our next episode with Rabbi Benny Lau Shlita. He recently came out with guidelines for how LGBTQ couples can live and thrive in an Orthodox setting. Should be a very interesting discussion to talk with him about how he feels about this very pressing and timely issue. Make sure to go to our website, intimatejudaism.com. Share this podcast. Visit our Patreon site. The link is in the show notes as well as in the description of this podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.